John Gordon, welcome
Thanks
to
for
the
having me.
Pulling Focus podcast. Really excited for this one. We've had a couple conversations just in the past about this podcast, and I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about Whomi and your story and digging into kind of the why behind what you do. But before we get started, I'd love just a quick intro on you and your background, and we can go from there.
Yeah, perfect. Well, first, thanks for having me. As always, it's great to see you. So last year, I kind of make a big switch. I left a nice, cushy corporate America time and decided I was going to start my own company. So I'm now the founder of a company called Whomi, which is a career development platform to help everybody find careers that they really love.
Yeah, and so before you started Whomi, you were at a couple of bigger companies, and the story of how you got to this place is really interesting to me of helping and mentoring. And so that's one of the things you mentioned is that throughout your career before Whomi, you had the chance to mentor others. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I came to entrepreneurship in a very different way, right? I think a lot of people start early and they figure out when they're just beginning their careers how to get involved with something new. I took a very different route. I had been in a corporate setting most of my career. In fact, I would say I grew up at IBM. I spent 15 years with IBM and learned a lot of foundational things. But my last two jobs at IBM were things that I thought were really interesting. I kind of took the CEO's pet project, and my job was to kind of make it real, like build a new business out of it. So one was in solutions and one was in artificial intelligence, where it started almost from nothing and had to bring them forward. And, I really realized I liked trying to take something like a company that had 100 years of experience and figure out where could it go next. So I went on from IBM to apply that to General Electric, and I launched 2 divisions there, and then to Bose, and then to Lenovo. That brought me here to the Raleigh area. And I realized the same thing that takes a company and says, hey, what makes you great? What do you have? What can you bring to the table? And then how do you turn it into something that's going to be useful for the world next? It actually applies a lot to each of us, right, as people, right? So, we're all pretty individual. We have different strengths. And thinking about what could we do next was a very daunting question. So I wanted to spend some time thinking about that and figuring out how to help people find their futures the way I'd helped companies find theirs before.
Fantastic. And I'd love just a quick overview of Whomi, the platform, what it is that it's focused on, and just a little bit about what makes it different from something like a LinkedIn or another job site.
Sure. Yeah, Whomi is, it was designed to address the problem of what do I do next for my job, right? So I like to think, if you think of LinkedIn is where you showcase what you've done in your past, and all of us have it, and we all use it really well. But Whomi is where you plan what you're going to do in your future. And so, if LinkedIn showcases your past, Indeed, Monster, all these places list jobs that are possibilities for you, but nobody tells you what should you apply for, what should you be doing, what should you focus your energy on. And when I worked for all these companies, I realized that so many people throughout them, they're really hardworking, they're pretty ambitious, you would say they're really smart, but they kind of struggled to figure out what was next. And a huge number of them were just kind of doing their jobs every day, right? Just trying to get through life, which I guess, many of us are. But I got to see, because I worked directly for 2 CEOs and maybe a step or so removed from the other 2, how did people who were driving their careers that they seemed like they just had everything laid out in front of them, what was different about people who were doing that? So I built a platform called Whomi to try to take some of the lessons that I learned and give people a way to think through what their possibilities were next for careers. It's an online, self-guided career development platform at Whomi.com.
And where did the name Whomi come from?
Yeah, sort of a weird name. I'm proud that you can actually pronounce it, since that's something that I get, like Whomi.
You get Whomi?
Or, yeah, all kinds of stuff like that. So Whomi actually stands for Who Am I, right? Who, the letter M, the letter I. Who am I? Because I think one of the biggest gaps we found people have when they're figuring out how to plan their careers is they don't realize all their potential. They see one option. They see, like, I could get promoted in my current job and move forward, or they see one path. But actually what happens is when you start to broaden your thinking about all the places you could apply your skills, you open up so many more possibilities, and we wanted to kind of recognize that. So I don't know, maybe you knew years ago you were going to be hosting podcasts like this, or maybe you knew, right? But I certainly didn't know this is what I was going to be doing.
Sure.
I find most people don't. So we wanted to build something that said, who am I? Who am I going to be? And recognize you have lots of possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I think the current way people find jobs is something happens, or they have a really bad experience at their current place, or they get laid off, and then it's, let me start looking, and their search is dictated by the job titles that they're seeing on LinkedIn or on Indeed.
Sure.
And so we've talked a little bit about this, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about getting out in front of the job search and the planning process.
Yeah.
And what advice would you give to somebody who is completely fine in the role that they are right now, and how they can start thinking through that process?
It's a really interesting question, and one of the, I don't know, maybe biggest differences between people who I think feel that their careers are going forward really well and people who feel stuck is they're being proactive. People who are moving forward are deliberately taking time to think about, what could I be doing next? And so what's interesting about that is too many other people will only think about what to do next, as you said, when they have a problem, right? You don't like your job. You just got laid off, right? As tons of people are having that happen to them today. If I look at the other side, who is actually moving their career forward, when they find their new jobs, it's when they've just had a big success. Right? Does that seem a little weird, right? Well, you've just had a great success. Your people probably love you, and now you're thinking about what's next, right?
Yeah.
Well, the reason is you've just created a lot of value, right? You have a new story to tell about something you've accomplished. And I don't know, you've probably interviewed people. You've been to many interviews. You've probably heard the question, tell me about a time when you've done something, right?
Right.
Done that before?
Right.
Has anybody ever asked you, tell me 10 times that you've done something? Like, I want to hear about each
Yeah.
of them. Has anyone ever asked you that?
No.
No, they don't. And what that means is if you've done something once, you've proven the value. You've proven what you can do. Maybe twice, so you can prove it wasn't a fluke. But if you keep doing it, you're not generating any more value for yourself. You're actually just, you're getting better at this task. You might get a little more efficient at it.
Sure.
But the big steps are when you make an accomplishment. So a lot of times what we see people doing is, and in fact, the people who grow their careers the most, I almost feel like they collect successes. They're like, I got one, now I want to go get another one, then I want a bigger one. Because
Like Pokemon.
Yeah, that's it, right? Because those are the stories that they're going to tell to impress the next person for their next job.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think you mentioned a couple things there, and one of the things that got me thinking was the interview process. And it had me thinking through all the experiences I've had in interviews have been generally the same, except for this one, because I knew Ryan, and it was more of a conversation than it was like an interview. But what do you feel like is missing from the interview process? I know you're focused a lot on the search and helping people find that path and that story, but maybe flipping it a little bit for like a recruiter or someone who's trying to hire, like what could they ask to get a better sense of that story, and really understand like what are the successes that this person has built up and how that might be able to help my organization?
Well, I think if you look at both sides of this together, right, you're trying to figure out if there's a match. Are you the best option to solve a problem the company has? And is the company the best option for you to hit the next step of your career? So, you really want to match with each other, right? You don't want to get to a company that's not right for you, and you don't want them to bring you in if you're not going to be successful and be a good fit.
Sure.
But I think what's been done in the past is everyone has thought about who they are by saying, here's the history of all the things I've done, right? A lot of resumes for people are, here's the list of my work that I've done and everything that I've done in it. And what's hard about that is you're really asking, because most of us have very varied careers, right? We've done lots of different things. You're putting the burden on the recruiter or the hiring manager to figure out, are you the right person for this job? And this might sound simple, and many people probably already do it, but I like to encourage people, and Whomi helps you build a separate kind of view of yourself, a separate resume for every type of role. So I'll just give an example. So for me, right, if I could go back and be a president and general manager of another division, that's sort of what I've done for the last while. I could go sit on a board. I could go be a consultant. So if I took my last job launching a solutions division for Lenovo, if I apply to be a general manager, I know people care about, do you meet numbers, do you hit targets?
Sure.
So I'm going to highlight that my last year we scored 235% of our targets, right? That's a good number. They'll say, okay, this is a person who can do things. If I'm going to be a consultant, I'll talk about the proven methodologies of the 4 stages I use to transform any of these companies and how I applied it with the board and the CEO at Lenovo. And if I decide that instead I want to sit on a board, I'm going to talk about governance processes and things that I have learned about working with leadership. So the story is the same, but how I talk about it will be materially different, right? And so if I give a generic resume that just lists stuff I did at Lenovo to each of those people, I won't be the exact right fit for any of them. They'll have to figure it out. So what I encourage, as your question was about what the recruiters say and the managers.
Yeah.
How do you be really precise about what you want and challenge everyone to respond and say, okay, you might do 100 things. Tell me how you do what I want, right? And if you can steer the candidates to let that experience come out, you'll figure out if they're a better fit.
So what is the easiest way or the advice you would give to the person who they've figured out, okay, here are the 2 or 3 types of roles that I could excel at or would really want to do, finding that through line, that story for each one? Like, how do you begin to attack that? Like, the person says, I've had 5 jobs,
right,
and they're all different,
right,
but I'm gonna apply to be like a sales manager. Like, how do they begin to craft those narratives, and how does Whomi help with that?
No, it's a great question. And look, and it is hard because there are so many narratives. Sometimes you only look at yourself one way, right? You don't see all the different sides of yourself. So I think what's really important is to think about, your hiring managers or your recruiters are the customers. You're the product. They're the customers for you. And it's important to understand what your customers want. So one of the things Whomi will do as it kind of walks you through a process. Did you ever use TurboTax before or something like that for your taxes?
Yes, I used that this year.
You did? Yeah. Good. I hope it worked out well for you. But it kind of taxes are complicated. TurboTax walks you through questions step by step. And at the end of the day, hopefully it works out. Whomi does the same thing for your careers. So once you say, hey, I might go on and be a sales leader, it's going to ask you, who's the hiring manager? Like, what's the type of role? It's a VP of sales for something. Then it's going to ask, well, what are the top 3 things you think they want? And it's going to force you to pause. You're not talking about you at all, thinking about them. And so you would say that sales manager, they want to know you can meet your numbers, you've got great customer relationships, you drive good retention. I wouldn't claim to know the right answers, but you're going to pick those things. And then it's going to interview you about your jobs. And it's going to say, I don't want to know everything about it. I want to know how you met numbers, built relationships, whatever those 3 things are that they care about. And so it just sort of shifts how you think into a way to bring out a view of you for this job. And if instead you decided you wanted to go into a marketing job instead of a sales job, right? Maybe it's going to ask you about demand gen or working with creatives, and so in your story, it's going to draw out the bullets in your resume that address those things. So your marketing resume and your sales resume, while they have the same job history, might look massively different.
Yeah. The story there, starting to compile those points, I feel like could be a little overwhelming to some people, but using that TurboTax example, taxes are overwhelming just naturally. I don't think that'll ever change unless some big sweeping legislation changes that. But starting just in small chunks and going step by step, makes it so much easier.
Well, and there's one other part, and if I kind of look at people that I saw have their careers, kind of take off and feel like they were in a good place, and people that struggled, the 3 differences that I saw from them: one, they were more proactive, right? They actually said, let's spend time on it. Because let's face it, figuring out what to do next in your career when you're not laid off or you don't have an issue, it's important, but it's usually not urgent, right? So if we're busy, right? I've got 3 kids, right? We've got all kinds of things going on. you don't always put the time in. You've put the time on what you have to do. You don't have to do this. So people who do well make time for it. They make it a priority. The second thing is that they go out and they actually talk to other people, right? So they, I think a lot of us think a lot about what we might do next, but you don't actually talk to people about what your possibilities. You have to be a little vulnerable to do that, right? To share, here's what I'm thinking about and I'm not sure. The people who are going really well do. I've known leaders who said, I want to become an SVP and go a senior vice president and grow to this area, and I want to be a general manager of this for years. And what was interesting about that was because they were reaching out and talking to people, they got help. People are actually pretty helpful, at least I found, right? If you can help someone and it only takes you a little bit of time, you will. And so that's sort of the second reason. And the third reason I talked about before was they collect success stories. So those are the three: being proactive, collecting success stories, and talking about it. And the reason I bring it up in this topic is as you go through TurboTax, as you were just saying, when you do it for your career on Whomi.com, it will ask you what are the top 3 things a sales manager wants to see. You might not know. All right, there's too many jobs for Whomi to build a database of every possible job that you could do, to have the right answers for it. And the answer isn't as important as building relationships. So what Whomi will tell you to do, it'll literally have a button that says, I think it says something like view networking message. And if you click on it, it will give you something that you should, it says reach out to people from your university, from your town, from people that are connected to you on LinkedIn who are in that space. All I want you to ask them is, what do you think the top 3 things I should show for this job are? Pretty simple question, right? You didn't say, will you mentor me for 6 months? Will you be my Sherpa through? You just said, can you share a little bit of insight? But now you're starting to build a connection of someone who is thinking about you, cares about you, and later on in this process, you'll be able to help them. You might reach out to them again to get connected.
Yeah, this is it's really timely having this conversation because just last night, I've been doing this for 3 years, going back and virtually sitting on like a panel of graduates from JMU's marketing program.
Oh, cool.
And so what it is juniors and seniors, they get to be in like small little huddles with a graduate. So like it would rotate. I would be with like 2 students at a time or 1 student, and they would just get to fire off questions because they're getting ready to enter the workforce. And things have dramatically changed in terms of how you search for jobs and just the hybrid and remote work that's become way more prevalent than when I graduated. It was there's still very much like geographic ties to where you were looking for jobs. And so that was one of the things that I didn't have as much advice on for them. But the thing that I just kept mentioning to them was you can shoot off a cover letter, you can shoot off a resume. I think I read in a blog post that the average job gets 250 applications, which is just crazy. But I mentioned to them, find somebody you know or find somebody who you don't know who works at the company. And people are more than happy to have like a quick 15-minute conversation, if it's convenient, if it's not taking too much time. And that just gets you, one, insight into the company more than just what you're seeing in a job posting, but also just building that connection and who knows what can happen after. But the reason I'm bringing that up is one of the things I kept hearing in terms of questions was like, what should I say to a recruiter or what should I put on my resume? And it was almost leaning towards the like, what do I need to say to like get this job? Because they're all, this is their first job out of college. They all just want to land something. And some of the advice I had was sort of see it as a way to kind of interview them too, of figuring out if it's going to be a good fit. It's obviously your first job. It's not going to define your career path for the rest of your life. But it was that balance between the like saying the right things, but also making sure it's the right fit for you. So what advice, if you were there last night and you were on one of the panels, like what advice would you give to that college student who might be a little bit nervous about landing that job, but also just trying to say the right things and stand out.
Right. Well, clearly, first I tell them to go to Whomi.com and get a free account or career plan because I'm an entrepreneur, so I have to say that to everybody. But second is I'd really challenge them to look at the experiences they have. So I'll tell you, because we've got examples from like seasoned general managers to MBA students to really early career people that have single mom tripled her income using Whomi, right, to go after this and reposition herself the right way. But a really early career person, let's see if I get the story right. I remember a young woman who she'd been a kindergarten teacher or maybe a substitute. She had sold gym memberships. She had worked as a receptionist at a nursing home. And she had a whole bunch of other jobs.
That's a spectrum of roles,
massively different, right?
Yeah.
And what her kind of first internship professional job was is she was a recruiter for a pharma company. So she loved it. And she wanted to get into management in a pharma company. But if you looked at her resume, the pharma work was, the top little bit. And then she had all this other stuff that didn't look like it was related to what she wanted at all, what the hiring manager cared about, right? I mean, they usually don't take kindergarten teacher as requirement for this. So she asked some people in the network, right? Reached out, what do you think they care about? And to be a manager of a recruiting team, I think the answers were something like, again, you had to make numbers because it was sort of working with clients, building relationships, and it was managing people. So as she looked at her history, she spun her sales memberships at the gym, I think she was sales at a newspaper, into a track record of making numbers. So it didn't matter that it was different. She figured out how to make the numbers and targets she had, no matter what her job was. And then my favorite one was she took the fact that she was a kindergarten teacher and she worked at a nursing home to say that she could lead people of all ages, right? From like as young as you get to as old as you get, right? So I thought they were very clever, but it repositioned her work in a way that she landed the job and ended up being able to talk about herself in a way she had never connected before. So to me, the big takeaways are really think about what that hiring person wants to see. And then comb through what you've done. Don't just say, can I like slightly edit? Comb through and pull out the things they want to see. You could have been a lifeguard. You could have scooped ice cream, right? Talk about how you collaborated, you were detail-oriented, and you could clean stuff up the right way, or you provide a great customer service. Just pulling out of what you've done what the value is, I think is really important to help them feel better about that kind of connection.
That makes a lot of sense. And within all of this, I'm thinking through, we already mentioned the time being sort of a resistance factor of just not putting in the time to start planning.
Yeah.
But what have you noticed have been the biggest obstacles that people have faced in terms of shifting over to this model of planning out their careers, or even an obstacle to even start using Whomi?
Yeah.
What have those been? And then the second part of that question is, what stories are you telling to help people understand like the benefit and overcome some of those obstacles?
So I think the two biggest obstacles. One is actually making the time and thinking about what your options could be next. So I always encourage everybody, you should have 3 options of what your next job could be. And sometimes they can be a little narrower. Yesterday I was working with a gentleman who was an attorney, and he said, look, I could be a general counsel for a smaller company, or I'm really deep at IP if I'm in the right kind of big company as an IP attorney, or I could be kind of a broad channel and partnerships counsel for a different kind. And as he went through his experience, he listed those out. So those aren't massively divergent, but they were different companies, different stories, even for him. I had one of the stories that actually got me really to say, I have to do this for my next job. I can't go out and just launch another division for another company. Was we worked with a woman, she was a single mom. I think she was first in her family, not only to get a sort of professional job, but go to college. So she was doing okay. She was making ends meet. Hard worker. She got passed over for a promotion. And she was really hoping this promotion was going to come with a 10% raise for her that would have been really life-changing. And she heard what probably many of us hear at different times. The manager said, I'm sorry, maybe next year. And for her, that was just so deflating because the only path she saw for her future was going to that next step and getting promoted. So we said, why don't you talk to some other people? Ask people what else you could do, right? There's too many options. This is not like take a Myers-Briggs survey and figure out if you should be a lawyer or open a flower shop. Like it's not. This was more for professionals figuring out where they're going to go next. And someone said, you've been kind of in this finance area, but you're kind of operating like the CFO of a growth division. So instead of thinking about the next step up across the hierarchy in a corporation, why don't you position your experience as a CFO of a growth division?
And someone said that to her.
Someone said it to her. Okay. It wasn't her idea.
It wasn't. Okay.
So back to your obstacles, she just couldn't picture her possibilities broadly enough. So, long story, I guess still kind of long, but she positioned herself that way, went out, and ultimately landed a job. So she got turned down, remember, for her 10% promotion. She tripled her income.
Wow.
Tripled her. Now, remember, she thought the 10% promotion was going to be life-changing for her and her son, right, as she is a single mom. She couldn't even begin to believe that was what someone would pay her for, and it's just competitive. She had the skills. She had the story. She just never thought of herself that way. And so she didn't, she wasn't lying about everything on her resume. She didn't go and start selling drugs. She was like that. She tripled her income because she recognized what she brought to the table and found the people who valued that. And so that's, one of the biggest obstacles is it's too hard to see all the possibilities, right? We grow up in families that see something. We have friends that see something, but if you've never been in an industry, you might not know what's out there. And it's especially as you develop your career, right? Not launch your career. Launching, actually, there's a lot of good resources. You were at JMU, right? I went to Notre Dame. I was at Texas for grad school. I won't talk about how they busted my bracket completely this last weekend, but they do great jobs in those career services to start your career. Do tests, do career interviews. But when you leave, if you leave college at 22 and you work till, 67? It's 45 years of 2,000 hours a year that there's no more path, right? There's no one that tells you what to do. There's no one to walk you through how to grow your career.
Sure.
And, I guess when we interviewed a lot of people about that, they said their biggest feeling was that they were overwhelmed. It's just too many options with no support. And so they tend to just let it go, right, until something, as you said, happens that forces them to do it. And I just, to me, that's a missed opportunity. Work is, maybe aside from sleep, the biggest thing you do in your life, right? I think you sleep 230,000 hours. You work 90. You don't commute, eat, play. There's nothing else you do from birth to death that's bigger than that. So I just love people to be proactive about it and not let it happen to them.
Yeah. I wonder how many people are out there that view, I'm sure most people view work as just kind of a means to an end. How much does this model of thinking shift a job from just being a job to planning and finding something that you both enjoy, but also is something that provides?
Yeah. I think what's important too is I don't want to come across that the only goal is to get promoted and make more money, right? That's not the only goal. The goal can be more free time, more flexibility, be closer to family, right? The goal, I just want you to think about what your priorities are. So the very first question in the TurboTax part of Whomi is, what are your priorities? Right? To look at money, location, flexibility, hours, type of work, team and culture.
Sure.
So we don't have an answer for what the right way to work is. And if you're happy, you want to do the same job for 40 years, do it. Just do it intentionally, not because you didn't think about it, right? And you didn't make a decision. So what I ran into working at all these bigger companies was too many people who weren't satisfied but didn't know how to go. Now, look, if you're satisfied, you've heard the old, there's an old MBA story about the guy who was a fisherman. Have you heard that one before? The short version was it. Guy's out, catching fish and bringing them in every day, sitting on the beach, just enough to eat, but he's really good at it. And so these MBA students walk up to him and say, hey, you're really good at that. You could sell these fish. Why don't you catch them all and sell them? He's like, why would I do that? Well, if you catch a lot of fish, then you can build a whole company and that can grow up, mass distribution. Great, 20 years later, you can retire and then you can go to the beach and fish. And the whole point was that's where he started, right?
Right.
So work doesn't have to be a means. It should be about what your goals are. What do you want to accomplish? And
Sure.
just being thoughtful about it. Most people probably put more time into picking their NCAA brackets for March Madness than they did thinking about their career over the last month.
Yeah, there's a part of me that thinks like that planning and just thinking about it could do both. Like it could either confirm like the place I'm at is great. Like I want to stay here or shift just a few things. Or it could be, no, I think that there's a couple different things out there for me, and I'd love to explore what that looks like. I remember you and I grabbed lunch for the first time a while back, and I asked you, like, what about the person who is in one role, but they want to switch to something completely different? And it might be hard to craft a narrative around, they were in sales, but they want to become a filmmaker, for example.
Sure.
Like that might be a little bit. I mean, I'm starting to get ideas in my head just around like, proposals and making stories and things of that sort. But whatever example it is, like, how do you start to approach that? And how could Whomi help with that?
Yeah. So look, it's a great one, right? Because those are very varied. And so I think most jobs you get hired for or invested in or some other path, right? So somebody is deciding to sign up to fund what you want to do. If you can fund your own future, great, do whatever you want. You don't have to go sell yourself to anybody. But for the vast majority of people, even if you want to go become a filmmaker, you've got to get a studio and you've got to have great space and you need to have clients that are going to do it. So whether it's how do you convince a client to invest in you, or how do you convince an investor to invest in you? Or how do you, if you're going to start your own, or if you want to go join a studio, how do you get someone who's in development to hire you? In all cases, I want you to think about, and Whomi will challenge you to say, who is that person? Not their name. What's their role? So if you were going to get investors, maybe it's a VC. If you were or an angel investor. If you were going to go work at a big company in film, maybe it's the producer, right? But think about them and think about what are the top 3 things they're going to want to say yes to you, right? That's the first switch. And then you have to look yourself in the mirror, right? I could say I want to go, play in the NBA. I might say in those top 3 things, number 1 should be good at basketball, right? It should be in there. And I'm not that and probably won't be. So it doesn't matter how much I want it. Whomi is not going to get me to that path. So you got to look in your mirror and say, if I understand what it really takes, can I get there? And now what I find is like mind-blowingly great for most people is for many jobs, if they are honest with themselves about what those 3 things are and have talked to people to find it, and then they look at their experience, they have more experience than they recognized. Like that woman who thought she could only make a little progression up in the finance chain, realized she could be a CFO. Just hadn't thought about it. She had it all. But you might, if like filmmaking required you to know something about, I don't know, maybe you have to use Premiere or something like that, right? It's an actual skill and you actually need it, and you don't have it. Well, just own up to it and then decide, are you willing to invest the time to build the skill?
Yeah.
And go do something with it so you can show a story. And I don't care if you volunteer at a nonprofit and make a film for them. So then when you interview, you can show your success story of the film. Right? Because you're not going to change what the person wants. So don't try to. Just figure out if you can be what the person wants and show successes so they have a reason to have comments. Look, people hire for success. If I chased or traced the chain through my companies even, when I was at IBM, I built solutions for a lot of industries, for government and retail and finance. So when I went to General Electric, they own a lot of industries, right? They do oil and gas and they do aviation and healthcare and lots of different divisions. So they liked the breadth of understanding of solutions. Well, when I went from GE to Bose. Bose said, hey, you just went to a non-technology company and made them a technology company. So they saw that threat, and that's what they wanted. When I went to Lenovo, they said, you went to a consumer electronics company and made it a new business model. That's what we want. So people hire for experience. They want to see what you have done and what the story is so they can connect the dots. I didn't know when I left IBM what all those dots were going to look like, but there's a very clear set of dots all the way through. And I find that for everybody, in their careers, finding the path, how something you have done is something someone else wants. When you get there, do something else great, and you can start thinking about who wants that next.
So let's back it out even further. So everything we've talked about centers around story. So what is that story that you craft about yourself? Like, what is the story that a company or recruiter might want to see? Where is your story headed? Like lots of just narratives that you're creating. I'd love to hear from John Gordon what makes a good story, because we've talked about dots, and those could very much be facts. But what makes something compelling? What makes something interesting?
I feel like I should be asking you that question. Like, are you the story expert in here, and how to go tell stories for people and figure out what makes them compelling? And I watched some of the stories that you guys have already put together, and they were like they're fascinating. Look, I think the biggest area in any story is, does it resonate with your audience? I mean, that's maybe not terribly insightful, but I think it is. Do they see a point in it that it relates to them? So. Especially when you're trying to compel some action, which in this case is that they hire you, your story has to be compelling to them. This may sound bad, but I don't actually think many people care about your biography. They're not sitting around with a middle school reading assignment to say, like, tell me everything about John or Riley or anyone else. It's not their job. They're trying to solve a problem. So in this particular case, the story is it relevant to them? And, so that's on the hiring side. But I think what, pushed me all the way into actually saying this is worth building something around Whomi was the resonance of people who struggled with their jobs and then recognized something great in themselves. And it shifted their life trajectory, right? Like in a massive way. And, so we talked about a couple stories we've seen, but I heard one just the other week from someone who had used Whomi. Actually, I think he's the first person who has used Whomi twice for two changes.
Cool. Wow.
Which we haven't really been around long enough for that, so that was an interesting story. But the background was he was trying to get into a job of being a product manager in some space. He started talking about what the skills were that he had and what he needed to develop. And so what he started doing was, in his job, he was in the IT side as a product owner. So these are slightly different roles within a technology company. So he was a product owner in IT. He wanted to be a product manager. When he decided what the 3 strengths were he needed and talked to his boss, he talked to other people, he then started working on building stories about them in his current job. So he's trying to, and I think this is a big area, focusing on what do you need to show for your next job, not just your current job. So the version of this story is he ended up getting promoted because his current manager said, wow, you're like thinking so much bigger than everyone. He got promoted. A week and a half after he got promoted, the whole division got laid off, right, as part of one of these areas. So he was doing really well, following his career right, and like many people, circumstances out of their control leave him in a bad spot. But the reason this is a good story is he called me right away and said, because I have been thinking about my career proactively, like I loved my job, I loved what I was doing, but I've been asking people, what should I learn to focus on this area? What should I develop as skills? What do you think about this story? Very simple questions. He had built his network. He had a lot of people in different companies who knew him. So he sent me a text that said, John, I just got laid off. And I was like, that seemed sad. He goes, I'm super excited because I've already landed a new job. It's a promotion. I'm going to get more money in the area I want. And now I have a whole severance package that I'm just pocketing. So it was an amazing step for him. And actually, the story continues. He's now put a deposit in, is buying his first house. Like all kinds of things are happening. it wouldn't have happened if he hadn't gotten laid off and didn't already have things he was thinking about ahead of time. Because again, he was doing so well, he just got promoted. So it wasn't like he was in a bad place and needed to get out, but he was just being proactive, building connections, thinking about what might be next for when it mattered. And then when it did matter, everything went through fine. He's thrilled for the outcome.
Yeah, and that story could resonate with a lot of people with what's going on, and just the themes around proactivity and the end results and what it really can do. I figure some people might feel like, oh, well, how much is it going to help me just thinking through what's next, and maybe being a little bit doubtful of, oh, I'll figure it out when something happens, and being reactive.
Sure.
But hearing that story, it motivates that proactivity. Tell me a little bit about the pay what you want model. So that's relatively new.
I think we announced it this morning officially. Yeah. So
Okay.
This is a mission for me, right? I'm sort of a missionary on this one because I just see so many people that have great potential. I really want to help them get to the careers they want. So, as most SaaS companies, or a subscription-based SaaS company, and most would say, well, focus on your segment who can pay you the most premium. So like I could go for people who are we've literally had someone who, has gone from making, the high $400,000 a year to well over $1 million. They could probably afford to pay a good amount, right, for this. It helped them. But there's so many people we want to help that right now might be struggling. They might have just gotten laid off, right? They're doing well. They're not far enough in their career to have big enough safety nets to cover their mortgage and other things that they're doing, or their rent. And so our mission, we've always said our mission is to help every working person build a career they love. And our sort of vision for that is that every person builds career plans. Like every single person should have one. And so we looked at ourselves and said, look, if we're putting barriers, like we'd love to get $10 a month from everybody for building plans and driving this out. But if that keeps people who need it from being able to use it, we're not following through on our mission. So we're going to change the model to say you have access to everything for free. You can go start. I'd encourage every person to build at least 3 plans, have at least 3 options. And if it's a challenge for you to come up with that, it's a good sign, right? That it's going to stretch your thinking. So it'll help you build at least 3 different options of where you could go. And then our model is pay what you can. If we'd love to get $10 a month from people, if you can do it, great. If you can pay $1, great. If you literally need this because you don't have any money coming in and you're dying, just use it. And we won't hide any features. And the other thing is, I didn't want us to become a company where actually our users were the product. If you've ever heard before, they say, if you're not paying, you're not the customer, you're the product, right? Because so many other systems, they want to advertise to you all the time.
Sure.
So they're selling your data to advertise to you so that they're selling you. That is how you get it for free. And, others will let people send you in-mails or something. They let salespeople reach out to you, and that's their business. They're selling access to you in order for you to use their tool. We really didn't want to have a mixed business model. We wanted to help people grow their careers. So we said, instead of doing a couple of those things, which we might have been able to sell our users in order to get more revenue in, we're going to stay pure. And we're going to try to, bet that there's enough people that believe in the same mission we do, having no ulterior motives of trying to help people grow their careers. They'll give us $1. They'll give us $2. They'll give us $10. They'll give us $50. You can give us $1,000. I don't think you give us $1,000. I think it probably tops out at $999. So if you want to give us $999 a month, you can. I don't think you could give us $1,000 today. So that's down. But we're okay with that. We believe we can go help enough people and drive enough growth, and there'll be enough people to support it that we can stay pure. So we're going to try it. If at the end of the day it fails and no one wants to pay even $1, I don't know, maybe we'll have to start advertising to you or do something else. But our goal is, if we can, to bet on people's, motivation to do the right thing and help each other. And so then when you do land these, new places, you come back, even if it's after, and you say, all right, I'm going to sign up now, even though I just landed a job, because this helped me do something, and I want to be part of helping other people.
Yeah, that's really admirable, and I feel builds a level of trust too, that there's not like a platform that you're trying to plan your career, but you're getting bombarded by recruiters because they're getting tagged with keywords and things of that sort. Like,
Right.
I feel a lot of people would want to monetize like as quickly as possible and try to scale as quickly as possible. But that concept of pay what you want feels really compelling. And so my last question is, what's next in the story for Whomi? Where is Whomi headed? You've mentioned some unknowns just around this model and if it'll work. And where do you see it, just the platform heading, or even just this almost mindset shift of thinking about your career?
Yeah, well, you had started off talking about how the whole working world has changed, right? I mean, so many people are able to be remote or hybrid now. It creates more options for all of us. So like the world is getting more complex, and I don't see that stopping. So I think the biggest things we're doing now is we're starting to partner with more universities, with more companies that are looking to try to help people move their constituents forward. So like we've got a great partnership with Notre Dame, right? And so in their business school, they reach out to their alums, they encourage them to build plans, right? Because they want the value of what they do to say we're helping our alumni throughout their careers. We didn't get them started when they graduated and then let them go and just ask them for money. We actually get them started, and then we're trying to help them grow and build their careers over time. So again, so they can be meaningful, and however every person defines meaning. So that's our mission. Whether it's companies, this morning I was reaching out to somebody who they just laid off a bunch of people and said, well, we want to help all of them get back for free. Like, we'll give them access. Let's work on this. So I think there's probably a lot in partnerships of people who believe in our mission and want to, help support people who are struggling, or, struggling is important right now, but frankly, everybody should make those 90,000 hours count, however you want it to. No, we don't have any mandate on what you should do with them. We just want you to think about it and make sure you were intentional. So when you wrap them up, you're like, that was a good use of time. I'm glad I did it that way.
Well, John, thank you so much for your time, and just awesome to hear about Whomi and what you're doing. And if people do have questions or are interested in learning a little bit more, where should they go?
Yeah, great. Well, first, like, every working person should go to Whomi.com and start building their career plans. They should have 3, right? That would be great. Then you can find me on LinkedIn as well, John Gordon on LinkedIn. So best ways to get in touch with us.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Riley.